All right. Ever been working on something online, like a travel itinerary or, a shared document, and suddenly, poof, your changes are gone? Like someone just swooped in and overrode all your hard work?
Oh, yeah.
That's exactly the kind of frustrating situation
Yeah.
that Rails developers are trying to avoid with this clever technique called optimistic locking. And that's exactly what we're diving into today with some fascinating articles and some real-world examples to guide us.
What I think is really fascinating about optimistic locking is the name itself.
Okay.
It's all about assuming that these conflicts are going to be rare rather than locking records right away, which can really slow things down.
Yeah.
Optimistic locking lets multiple people make edits at the same time.
Oh, okay.
But it has these built-in safeguards to catch and handle those conflicts if they do happen.
So it's kind of like a trust but verify approach?
Yeah, exactly.
But how does Rails actually know when there's been a conflict?
Well, think of it this way.
Okay.
Imagine each record in your database has kind of like a hidden timestamp.
Okay.
Like a last updated marker.
Okay.
This is what we call the lock version column.
Gotcha.
Every time you update a record, Rails is checking this timestamp.
Okay.
And if it's changed since you started editing, boom, conflict detected.
So instead of just blindly overwriting someone else's changes, Rails throws up a flag and says, hold on, something's not right here.
Exactly.
To illustrate this, let's say we have these two users, Billy and Jenny, both trying to edit the same product description on an e-commerce website.
Right.
So Billy opens the editor first, and at that moment, the product has a lock version of, say, 10.
Got it.
So Billy's busy, crafting the perfect description, maybe highlighting some new features or something. Meanwhile, Jenny's on the other side of the world.
Yeah.
Updating the product's inventory, maybe based on the latest sales figures or something.
Yeah.
She hits save first. And because this is an update, Rails bumps that lock version up to 11.
Right.
Now, when Billy, completely unaware of Jenny's changes, tries to save his meticulously crafted description, Rails steps in and says, whoa, whoa, whoa.
Oh.
Your version is outdated.
Right.
It sees that Billy's trying to save a version with lock version 10, but the record in the database is already at 11, and this mismatch triggers a active record, stale object error.
That's right.
Ah, so that's the signal that there's a conflict.
Right.
Billy's changes are based on an older version of the product.
Right.
But wouldn't this just result in some, confusing error message for Billy?
It could, if you're not careful.
Okay.
But this is where Rails gives developers those tools to handle these situations gracefully.
Okay.
One simple approach is to create a custom error page explaining to Billy, hey, it seems like somebody else made some changes while you were working. Would you mind taking a look and resubmitting your edits?
Okay.
Something like that.
So that's much better than just a blank page or some generic error.
Right.
It sounds like optimistic locking not only helps prevent data corruption, but it also pushes developers to think about making things smoother for users.
Precisely. It encourages a more user-centric approach to development.
Right.
Now, while a custom error page is a good starting point, some of these articles go a step further and offer some even more elegant solutions.
Oh, okay.
They discuss techniques for actually catching this active record stale object error within the code itself.
So instead of just displaying a static error page, you could potentially create a more interactive experience.
Exactly.
Okay.
Imagine this.
Yeah.
When Billy tries to save his changes and that error pops up, Rails could actually reload the product description.
Okay.
With Jenny's updates, but also preserve Billy's edits.
Oh, wow.
This way, Billy can see what's changed. Maybe tweak his description a bit.
Yeah.
And then resubmit it without losing all of his work.
Okay. That's pretty clever.
Yeah.
It feels like a much more collaborative approach.
Right.
Than just telling Billy to start over.
It is. And I think it highlights one of the key benefits of optimistic locking. It's not just about preventing errors. It's about handling them.
Yeah.
In a way that keeps that user experience smooth and avoids frustration.
But I'm guessing it's not a magic bullet.
Right.
I mean, the articles did mention situations where optimistic locking might not be enough.
You're absolutely right.
Okay.
There are certain cases where conflicts are more likely or where the consequences of a conflict are more severe.
Okay.
In those scenarios.
Yeah.
a more heavy-handed approach like pessimistic locking might be necessary.
So when would we actually need to call in the big guns and use pessimistic locking?
Well, one of the articles used the example of managing a website's page hierarchy, where the structure is organized like a tree with parent and child pages. Imagine trying to rearrange those pages while someone else is doing the same thing.
Oh, yeah.
Things could get messy really quickly.
Yeah, I can see how concurrent edits in that scenario could lead to some serious data corruption.
Exactly.
Okay.
And that's where pessimistic locking comes in. It's a way of saying, okay, this is a delicate operation.
Right.
Nobody else can touch this part of the data while I'm working on it.
So it's about choosing the right tool for the job, understanding the trade-offs between optimistic and pessimistic locking.
Right.
And knowing when to apply each approach.
Precisely. Recognizing that there's no one-size-fits-all solution.
Right.
When it comes to concurrency in Rails.
Well, this has definitely given me a lot to think about.
Okay.
We've covered the basics of optimistic locking.
Right.
From how it uses that lock version column to detect conflicts.
To some of the ways we can handle those conflicts gracefully.
What stands out to you as the most important takeaway so far?
I think what's really interesting is that idea that optimistic locking isn't just about preventing data errors. It's about thinking about the user experience and finding ways to handle conflicts smoothly and transparently.
That's a great observation.
Okay.
It really encourages a more holistic view of development.
And I'm also curious to dive deeper into pessimistic locking.
Okay.
And understand when it's the right tool to use.
Well, that sounds like a perfect segue to our next segment.
Okay.
Let's take a closer look at pessimistic locking.
All right.
And explore some real-world examples of how it's used in Rails applications.
Awesome.
Sounds good.
All right, so we've talked about the theory behind optimistic locking.
Right.
And how it uses that clever lock version trick to keep things in check.
Yeah.
But I'm kind of itching to see how it actually works in practice.
Okay.
What do these code examples look like? Well, one of the great things about Rails is that it handles a lot of the heavy lifting for you.
Oh, okay.
You don't have to write complex logic to increment the version number or check for mismatches or anything.
So it's not like we need to be hardcore coding wizards to implement this.
Not at all.
Okay, good.
Once you have that lock version column in your database table, Rails takes care of most of the magic behind the scenes.
And how do we even get that column in there? Is it some elaborate process?
Thankfully, no.
Okay.
One of the articles included a snippet showing how you'd add it using a Rails migration.
Okay.
It's as simple as adding an integer column called lock version.
Okay.
You run a single command and Rails updates your database schema.
Gotcha.
Boom, you're ready to go.
Okay. That sounds way less intimidating than I imagined. But what about those situations where conflicts do arise? We talked about those custom error pages and, how to make things user-friendly.
Right. Remember that example with Billy and Jenny?
Yes.
Editing the same product description. One of the articles showed how you could catch that active record stale object error directly in your controller code.
So instead of just displaying a static error message, you can actually do something a little bit more dynamic.
Exactly.
Okay.
You could reload the product description from the database, fetching the latest version with Jenny's changes.
Right.
But here's the clever part.
Okay.
You could also merge Billy's edits back into the form.
Oh, so Billy wouldn't lose all his work.
Right.
Oh, that's a relief.
You're essentially saying, hey, Billy, we saved your changes. But someone else made updates too.
Right.
Take a look at the combined version and let us know if you want to make any more tweaks.
That feels so much more collaborative.
Right.
And less like a back to square one situation.
Yeah.
But what if Billy's edits kind of clash with Jenny's?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And that's where clear communication and maybe some additional safeguards come in. You could highlight the conflicting changes within the form.
Okay.
Maybe with different colors or some visual cues. And you could even add a warning message prompting them to coordinate their edits a little bit better.
It sounds like this conflict resolution part is where things could get really complex. Are there any techniques in Rails that can help kind of simplify things?
Absolutely.
Especially for larger applications.
The articles mentioned a technique called rescue from.
Okay.
This lets you handle specific types of errors like our active record stale object error in a centralized way.
So instead of repeating the same error handling code in every single controller, we can create kind of a catch-all mechanism.
Precisely.
Okay.
You define how to handle those errors in one place.
Gotcha.
making your code cleaner and easier to maintain. It's a great way to ensure consistency across your application.
Okay, so we've seen how to add the lock version column, handle conflicts gracefully, and even streamline our error handling code. It's all starting to click into place.
What's fascinating here is how Rails strikes this balance between power and simplicity. It gives you the tools to implement sophisticated mechanisms like optimistic locking without overwhelming you with complexity.
It definitely feels like Rails is doing a lot of the heavy lifting for us, which is a huge plus. But I'm also realizing that we as developers still need to understand how things work under the hood.
Absolutely. Knowing the why behind the what allows you to make more informed decisions. About when to use optimistic locking and when to consider other approaches. It empowers you to choose the right tool for the job.
And speaking of other approaches, I think it's time we shift gears. And dive into that more forceful sibling we mentioned earlier. Pessimistic locking.
An excellent point. While optimistic locking is great for many scenarios, there are times when you need a more, shall we say, assertive approach. Let's explore those situations.
And see how pessimistic locking steps in to save the day.
Okay, so pessimistic locking, we've hinted that it's the more intense approach to handling concurrency. When do we actually need to bring out this heavy artillery?
So you know how we said optimistic locking? Assumes conflicts will be rare. Pessimistic locking takes the opposite stance. Assume conflicts are likely and prevent them altogether.
So it's kind of like saying, hey, this data is super important. Nobody else touch it while I'm working on it.
Exactly.
Okay, I can see how that would prevent conflicts. But one of the articles mentioned a downside. Performance. Didn't it say pessimistic locking could slow things down?
It can. Because you're locking records for longer periods. Other processes might have to wait their turn. Imagine hundreds of users trying to buy concert tickets simultaneously. Pessimistic locking on the inventory could create a bottleneck,
leading to slow checkout times and frustrated customers.
So it's a trade-off. Guaranteed data integrity, but at the potential cost of performance.
Precisely. That's why it's so crucial to understand the context of your application. Are conflicts likely? Are the consequences of a conflict severe? If the answer to both is yes, then pessimistic locking might be the way to go.
That example from the article is about rearranging pages in a website's hierarchy. Really brought this point home. It's such a delicate operation where concurrent edits could just wreak havoc.
If two people try to move pages around at the same time, you could end up with a broken navigation structure. In that scenario, it makes sense to use pessimistic locking to make sure that only one person can modify the page tree at a time.
And how do we actually implement pessimistic locking in Rails? Is it as straightforward as optimistic locking?
You bet. Rails provides a couple of handy methods with lock and lock. They work similarly. Essentially wrapping your code in a lock zone. Any other process trying to access that record will have to wait until your code finishes executing.
So if we go back to that page hierarchy example, we could wrap that entire page moving logic within a with lock block.
Exactly. That way, if someone else tries to move a page while the lock is in place, Rails will politely tell them to wait their turn. Their request will be queued until the lock is released. Ensuring that their changes are applied to the updated tree structure, not an outdated one.
It seems like choosing between optimistic and pessimistic locking boils down to understanding the risk versus reward in your specific application.
That's a great way to put it. If conflicts are unlikely and the consequences are manageable, optimistic locking offers a good balance of concurrency and data integrity. But if you're dealing with high-stakes operations where even a small error could have major repercussions, pessimistic locking provides that extra layer of protection.
Well, this deep dive has definitely equipped us with the knowledge to make informed decisions about handling concurrency in Rails. We've explored the ins and outs of optimistic and pessimistic locking, examined real-world examples, and even peeked at some code snippets.
Remember, The journey of a developer is all about continuous learning and exploration.
Right.
As you encounter new challenges, don't hesitate to dive deeper into these concepts and experiment with different approaches.
And to our listeners, we hope this deep dive has given you a clearer understanding of how to keep your Rails applications running smoothly and your data safe from those pesky concurrency conflicts.
Now, here's something to ponder.
Okay.
Think about the online platforms you use daily, from collaborative documents to banking apps. How are these systems using locking mechanisms behind the scenes to ensure a seamless and reliable experience?
That's a great question to leave our listeners with. Until next time, keep diving deep and happy coding.